Hello and welcome to the Armenian News Network, Krung. I'm Asbed Bedrosyan, and along with Hovik Manucharian, we'll be talking about issues related to the delimitation and demarcation of the border between Armenia and Azerbaijan. We're recording this on Thursday, December 19th, 2020.
Hello, everyone. So in recent weeks, the issue of figuring out the border between Armenia and Azerbaijan has been getting a lot of attention, as well as creating a lot of confusion. And in today's podcast, we hope and we'll try to understand the processes that international borders are drawn by looking at the border issues in the former USSR, and then narrowing in on the current Armenia-Azerbaijan border demarcation process. To talk about these issues, we have with us George Tabakian, who is a Lebanese-Armenian who repatriated to Armenia in 2011. He's the co-founder of Repat Armenia Foundation and Sahman NGO, and the executive director at Arar Foundation, which works mainly on projects with the MOD in Armenia. And Asbed Kotchikian, who is a senior lecturer of political science and international relations at Bentley University in Massachusetts. Hello and welcome, everyone.
Hi, Hovik. Hello.
We'll start off with some background provided by Asbed Kotchikian, as well as an interesting presentation then followed up by George Tabakian. So, to start off, Asbed, how are international borders drawn among countries? And what is the difference between delimitation, demarcation, and delineation?
Well, they're drawn in a very messy way. Let's start with that way. It takes a lot of effort, a lot of energy, and a lot of planning. It also depends on the relation between the countries that you're dealing with. But in general, let's assume that there is no conflict between two countries. The three major steps is basically, as you mentioned, there is a delimitation, which is a specific and border drawing agreement as to, let's generally understand what the border between our two countries would be. That's delimitation. Then you have demarcation. Demarcation is where you have a survey teams go on the ground and they start putting sometimes, let's say, landmarks. They put sort of markers and so on and so forth. And then at the end, you have a delineation, which basically they look at all of these sort of material that demarcation has done. Usually demarcation and delineation work hand in hand. Usually when you have a commission of demarcation, they also work on delineation. They end up basically creating the boundary and basically also drawing the maps, finalized maps. One thing I have to say that usually at the end of the delineation, countries end up having like several hundred, sometimes 100, 150 maps of various scales to be the official maps between the two countries that they can use. And eventually this whole thing is signed by an international bilateral agreement. Sometimes when you don't have that bilateral agreement, if there is a minor disagreement, international bodies intervene. I know, for instance, one specific case was between Nigeria and Cameroon that ICJ, the International Court of Justice, actually arbitrated, and they came up with a sort of an acceptable norm for both. So this is how usually they decide on borders between countries.
Interesting. And what were the borders like? So we keep hearing references to the USSR borders being used within the context of the Armenian and Azerbaijani border demarcation process or delimitation process. What were the borders within the USSR like during the during the USSR and after the collapse of the Soviet Union?
Yeah. I think George will be talking about it as well, but one of the things to keep in mind is that the borders in the Soviet Union were drawn and redrawn constantly. And it also depended on the nature or the autonomy level of the borders of the entities you're dealing with, right? You have the autonomous oblast, autonomous socialist republic, you have the Soviet Socialist Republic. So the borders constantly changed within the Soviet Union, and it didn't make much of a difference, right? Because they were all one big happy family, not so happy, but one big family. And within that context, you actually witnessed several redrawing of maps internally in the Soviet Union. But as I said, it didn't make much of a difference. For instance, Crimea was in 1954 transferred from a from a Russian autonomous Soviet Socialist Republic to Ukraine's autonomous Socialist Republic. But at that point, it didn't make a difference. But then obviously in 2015, it became an issue. And the Soviets also followed a policy of Korenizatsiya. There is no direct translation of this, but they created nations out of nowhere. In Central Asia, if you look at Central Asia, the maps that were drawn there, it's mind-boggling. There used to be only two sort of entities, Turkestan and Kyrgyzstan. And then eventually, by 1930s, 1940s, they ended up creating those five republics. So those borders actually changed constantly. And again, sometimes it was based on local local republics. They would agree on exchange and so on, but it didn't make much of a difference. Now, when the Soviet Union collapsed, the general agreement was that with the solution of such an entity like the Soviet Union, which is also the case, by the way, in the case of Yugoslavia, then the internal boundaries that were drawn would be internationally accepted. However, almost invariably, all of the former Soviet republics had to sign bilateral agreements, not only amongst themselves, let's say, for instance, Belarus with Ukraine, but also Belarus with Slovakia, Czechoslovakia, or with Poland. And usually they went through the processes that I just mentioned. So that's how it developed in the case of the borders in the Soviet Union, former Soviet Union.
So let me quickly go back. You mentioned that all the internal boundaries would have to be internationally accepted. Which boundaries, and who arbitrated those boundaries, and
Right.
what is the source of truth for those boundaries?
Right. There was none, because again,
Okay.
after Soviet Union, the Soviet, if you want to look at it, it's the Politburo of the Soviet Union. It started with Stalin, one man to show, but then it was the Politburo and committees within Politburo that would decide on the boundaries. But the internationally recognized borders would be the borders of the Soviet Socialist republics. So for instance, Abkhazia and South Ossetia in Georgian Soviet Socialist Republic were part of the Georgian Soviet Socialist Republic. So technically, when the maps were drawn, and even now you would see that those two entities are part of Georgia, independent Georgia. And this is the argument, again, which I'm sure Georgia will be talking about as well, about Nagorno-Karabakh, right, about Artsakh. Transnistria, the same thing. It was an autonomous region. Crimea, again, the same thing. So it was just the larger entity, the larger borders between the Soviet Socialist republics.
And also, you mentioned Crimea, which is an interesting legal precedent, because a lot of people mention the fact that, for instance, even Russia itself does not recognize the borders of after as of 1988, for instance, or 1991, because they have decided to recognize Crimea as part of Russia. So what kind of legal precedents does that set for other countries in the region, and what is the prevailing sort of convention or legal sort of convention to use when deciding, okay, which year's borders should we use?
It's bilateral, Hovik. It's always bilateral. It's bilateral agreements between the two parties. If not, it might end up being a no man's land, and it might end up being disputed, right? So, for instance, when it comes to Crimea, Russia acknowledged Ukraine's border as they are. After in 1980, in 1991, 1990, in 1993, they signed an agreement recognizing the borders of independent Ukraine and independent Russia, which was basically based off, with minor adjustments, based on what was happening, what the borders were between Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic and Ukrainian SSR. So,
and that included Crimea and Ukraine, yes, correct?
Crimea was within Ukraine.
Right.
Crimea was an autonomous republic within Ukraine. Now, what happened is that the border change, or the annexation of Crimea, was based on a provision that this land is seceding and joining another land, so the right of self-determination. It's a bit convoluted. I mean, we can have a whole discussion about the level of autonomy when it comes to ASSR, or Autonomous Oblast, and Soviet Socialist Republic. But the overlying and overarching agreement is that Soviet boundaries drawn by Moscow among the 15 constituent republics became the foundations of the 15 independent states. Now, from that point on, whatever they decide bilaterally with their neighbors, it's their issue. But for instance, Armenia did sign an agreement with Georgia about their border in 1994, although they have some issues, especially the Babra-Minos-Minda border. there's a huge land of no man's land there to dispute it again, but more or less they had signed an agreement alienating the border between the two countries.
Okay, thanks for that background. Now I'd like to turn to George. So having all this background, where is the Armenia-Azerbaijan border today, and how is it being determined, George? I believe you have some material prepared for us.
Yeah, since, first of all, thank you for this opportunity. I mean, this is very highly debated issue in Armenia today, and we have the experts and the non-experts discussing this, mainly the non-experts actually talking about this. So I think this discussion is very useful also for our diasporan friends to understand exactly what's going on. Now, since we are talking about borders, then we should have maps. So that's why I have some slides showing, showing what little bit of historical background, so we understand where we came from, the borders that we have, or I would call it a line of contact. I never call the border between Azerbaijan and Armenia a border, because it's not a border, it's line of contact. And then I'll show some slides about the Soviet maps versus the Google Maps, and versus what's the reality on ground, because they are all different. So let me share my screen and to take it from there. I think you can see the screen right now, right? Okay. So a quick historical background, 1988, the conflict which was between Armenia and Azerbaijan, it turned into a wide-scale operations, firstly in Artsakh, so the mainland Artsakh versus the Azerbaijani villages. And at the same time, we had a conflict on the border in Tavush and Geghar-Konik, which was between Armenia and Azerbaijan. So it was not a conflict between Artsakh and Azerbaijan, it was a conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. So this conflict had ups and downs. We lost sometimes, then the war ended with our victory. Important to mention here that we had enclaves on both sides. So we had one enclave called Artsakh on the Azerbaijani side. This is like a land owned by Armenia or by Soviet Armenia, but it's located within Azerbaijan. And Azerbaijan had 4 enclaves within Armenia, which were owned by Azerbaijan. So this was done during the Soviet time, you know, the swap of lands and the relationship between the golkhos of the cities and the areas. I'll show all these through the maps. So in 1991, 21st of September, Armenia declares its independence, and on the 18th of October, Azerbaijan declares its independence. It's very important to mention that, and we had the war ongoing during this period. So on the 11th of May, we had the Trilateral Ceasefire agreement signed between the 3 ministers in Bishkek. The 3 ministers were the Armenian Defense Minister, Azerbaijani Defense Minister, and Artsakh's Minister of Defense. The agreement was signed over 3 days, actually. The first signature was on the 9th, then the second was on the 10th, then the 11th was the final one. And the agreement was signed between these countries. We had, at that time, we had military posts on both sides in Artsakh and Azerbaijan. So the independence which was declared by both countries, it was the independence over the territory controlled by our armed forces and their armed forces. So the situation is the following. We have an administrative boundary between Armenia and Azerbaijan, which was the administrative boundary during the Soviet period. The Soviet Union collapsed. This boundary was no use anymore because it was drawn in a way to help assist the economy rather than security or the state border. This was more an economic border. You know, this village had needed lands for their sheep, or this village needed lands for their potatoes. So these lands were always swapped. And over the years, these maps were changed many, many times. We never had the proper research of these maps because we never took this border seriously. This was the border between, mainly the main border was between Armenia and Artsakh. And this was an open border for us. I mean, we could have drive to Karvajar, we could have drive to Goris. from Rapan, we could have drive to Batlu. So it was, we never thought that this will become a border, and we never thought that we will come back to this situation where we are discussing the border. So this is very short historical background, and then, okay, so, okay, so between the 11th of May until the 26th of September, 2020, the start of the large-scale operation of the last war. So we had these military posts with the trenches, which were considered the border, but they were not. Many times we heard about official border, but it was never an official border because Armenia and Azerbaijan, they were in an undeclared war situation. We never recognized each other as independence, and we never did any delimitation on the border. So the border was military posts on both sides. It was trenches, and we had minefields between these posts. So the war happened on the 10th of November. There was that signature of the infamous agreement. So what happened is we had a new situation where there is a new trilateral agreement between the three countries, Russia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. We had Russian peacekeeping forces mobilized to Artsakh, and they were supposed to, or they are keeping the new line of contact between Artsakh and Azerbaijan. There was a new line of contact established between Armenia and Azerbaijan. I will show it through maps. And these are the borders which were where the Karvajar and Kashatagh regions were before we handed them over to Azerbaijan. And finally, a new corridor was established, which was the Bersol corridor, betterly known as Lachin corridor with its Azerbaijani name, which is now a demilitarized zone, and it's totally under the control of the peacekeeping forces, the Russian peacekeeping forces. So let us look, have a review of, check the map. This is until the 27th of September 2020, the day the operation started. So this was the map of Armenia. I don't know if you can see the mouse that I'm showing. Okay, so this is the line of contact between Tavush and Azerbaijan. And then you have the line of contact between the Armenian Gerar-Kunik and Azerbaijan. And then you have the line of contact between Artsakh and Azerbaijan. This was Iran, and this line was the line of contact between Armenia and Nakhicheva. I'm stressing to use the word line of contact because it's the best term to use for a situation like this, when you don't have delimitation and there was practically undeclared war. There was recurring shooting between the two sides, hostages, sometimes diversion attacks, sometimes a little bit of larger scale operations, which we saw in 2010 in Berkaper, in Tavush. But this was the area controlled by our armed forces. Officially, it was the Armenian armed forces and the Artsakh defense forces, which is basically one entity, but officially or non-officially, officially it was divided into two armies. So the new line of contact after the 9th of October. So we have, this is Artsakh, or whatever left from Artsakh, which is 25% of the land we had. What you see here is the new line of contact between Artsakh and Azerbaijan. This line of contact is monitored now by the Russian peacekeeping forces along with the Artsakhi defense forces. So we have both checkpoints. Sometimes, actually, it's very funny. Sometimes the Artsakh defense forces are in the front and the Russians are in the back. Sometimes they are next to each other because there is no space. And sometimes it's like an open area. It's a road which is blocked by wheels or like trash or something that shows that it's a border. Now, the line of contact of Artsakh and Azerbaijan is more or less clear because the Russian peacekeeping forces were quickly deployed. On the second day, they already had deployed all over this region. The dispute part is the new line of contact, which starts from Vartanis area until Meghri that we see here. This is a new 500-kilometer line of contact, which needs to be monitored by the Armenian forces because this area was Karvajar, it was handed over, And then this area was Kashatagh, or the way they call it, Hubatlu. It was handed over to the Azerbaijanis. So we have only this corridor between the two areas. So this new 500-kilometer area border was to be monitored by the Armenian forces. Now, what happened is this was the biggest mobilization of the Armenian forces in the past 30 years, because we had to remove our troops from Artsakh and deploy them on the new line of contact. And the situation was the following: we were deploying our forces, and they were deploying our forces, and there was no clear border. Between each other. So there was no border. It was mountains and villages and all that. Apparently, and this is something we knew 2 days ago when the incidents of Syunik happened, when you do any delimitation, there should be a basis for delimitation. I mean, the basis can be if the countries are friendly, like Armenia and Georgia. It can be more or less on a river or a hilltop, which can be protected and secured easily.
As a background, I wanted just to mention that I guess by incidents in Syunik, are you referring to the cases where the Azeri troops demanded sort of withdrawal of Syunik?
Yes.
I guess it was the villagers protecting some of the posts, and they approached the villagers and said they should withdraw. Is that the case?
Well, the case is the following: when during the war, when the army was busy in Artsakh, the volunteer groups of the villages in Syunik, which is Meghri, Rapan, until David Peg and Gornitsor, these villagers were very quickly mobilized, and they were protecting their villages, basically protecting the heights of these villages in a way that the village is secured. So they didn't follow the administrative boundary of the Soviet Union. They just took over the hills, which are protecting their own villages. So when the deployment or the deployment of the army started, and the issue of the lands started coming out, there was the conflict, because the basis actually was the last Soviet maps of the region. This is something we knew 2 days ago only, when we saw how things were going on. So just let me continue with the slides.
George, when you say the last maps from the Soviet Union, are those ones from 20s or 80s?
Actually, the last maps which are used are between 78 and 88. These are the last map. These are the maps I have. Actually, I have those maps in paper, and they are scanned for this presentation.
One thing I need to add here is that when you talk about these are the public maps for public consumptions, and more often than not, they're not detailed. Having access to military maps, but military maps do not have administrative divisions per se. They have topographic maps. The Soviet military maps were actually very detailed. So I'm not sure if those would come in handy when you're delineating or demarking or...
Actually, Asbedjan, actually they are the same. They are the same. When the Soviet Union collapsed, the department which was making all these maps, the Soviet Union had maps not only for the Soviet Union, all over the world.
I know the military maps. Actually, the military maps, for instance, that a lot of people use now for Antarctic are Soviet military maps that are used up until today, because there were details. That's why I'm making the distinction between administrative maps and military maps. The military maps being more detailed than administrative maps.
And those military maps, they had these administrative borders, actually. They were showing all these borders. So this is the UN map of Armenia. What UN has done, it's true that they recognize the independence of Armenia, but they recognize the state, not the international border. This is very important, because today this discussion is done by the state, that UN has they have recognized the border. This is not true. Usually the UN recognizes a state as a state, and the borders are left for as Asbed mentioned, for the bilateral agreements between the countries. So between Armenia and Iran, there is another bilateral agreement like we have in Georgia, but we don't have that with Azerbaijan. This is very important. And what the map that's been used by the UN, this is the last Soviet map that we have, the last Soviet Union maps that we have. I'll do a comparison and you will see.
George, since you mentioned all three countries, what about the border with Turkey, which used to be the international border?
the border with Turkey is the following. Turkey recognized our independence, actually. They were the second country, actually, interestingly, recognized our independence after Iran. And the way I know it, that they also recognized the border, which is monitored by the Russian troops. The border between Armenia and Turkey is monitored by the Russian troops. So the same border where the Russians were, or the Soviet army was, and the next day they were Russian troops. So it was, Turkey recognized the independence and they recognized the border. And the border has delimitation, and the demarcation was done by the Russians long time back. That's another story. It needs another presentation.
Okay.
So before going into our maps and the situation in Armenia, I need to go quickly what happened between Lebanon and Israel, the demarcation, because I was part of that committee in June 2000. This was like a 5-month work, which was done by the Lebanese army and by the UN, actually, between the Lebanese army and the Israeli army. The map was there. The points, the approximate points were there. So we had, this is the final, how the border looks like. So before that, we had committee like this, which is, we have the military from both sides. We have the UN people there, and they would go for every point, confirming that this is the point which needs to be the border where the fence will be built. And then taking GPS points, the coordinates were mentioned on the maps, and they were fixed every day. So every point was a conflict on its own. The Lebanese trying to get 1 meter away, and the Israelis were just thinking for their own security. So many times the Israelis were just leaving the land and going to the hills so that they can monitor it properly. And then this is the final border, what it looks like on the maps and on Google Earth, because Google Earth uses those international boundaries. So you see that the blue line is there, it's internationally recognized. On the left, you have a military post by Israel, and on the right, there is a military post by Lebanon. This is one of the demarcation which went on smoothly, actually, over 4 or 5 months. We had a lot of conflicts, but since there was no war and since the UN was the mediator, so things were moving smoothly. Now let's go into the real issue here, the Armenia-Azerbaijan administrative borders marked on the maps of the Soviet Union. I'm using 1 to 50,000, sorry, there is the 0 missing there, 50,000 maps. These are the last printed maps in 1988. As I said, these maps have changed a lot. They have changed a lot during the years. And the last maps which we have are used by Google Earth for the boundaries. So this is a village in Armenia called Berkaper, and the line that you see here, which is an irregular line, I mean, no way you can build a border like this, because no way you can protect it, actually. Even if you have a friendly country, I mean, you cannot protect it against traffickers or, illegal actions going on. So this is the border we have. And in the next slide, if you see Google Earth, we can see that Google Earth has taken those administrative boundaries which were between Soviet Armenia and Soviet Azerbaijan, and they have used it as a border between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Now, if you take the same area and you see to see what is really going on until today, actually, this is the situation. So you have the yellow line is the border, is this administrative boundary. The black points that you see are the Azerbaijani military posts, and the red posts that you see, these are the Armenian military posts. So between these posts, you have the reservoir Achilles, and then on the left you have like a dead zone, which is usually minefields. This is the real contact, the line of contact, and this is around 1,000 kilometers all over between Armenia and Azerbaijan and Nakhicheva.
And has this line of contact changed over the last 30 years or since 1994?
It has changed every year, actually. Many times we occupied a new height, which was important for us. Many times they came across, so this was always changing. And if you remember, the last conflict was in July, actually, 2020, when we took over a height called Anvach to monitor their Agdam city properly. So the ceasefire was signed wherever our military posts were. So these are the military posts, and this is where the ceasefire was signed. We never cared about that the administrative boundary between these two countries. We never discussed the border. The line of contact was changed every year. There were clashes, there were attacks, there were diversion attacks, and a lot of resources were spent by both countries to strengthen this line of contact. Apart from this is something important, and nobody is mentioning this until now. As I said in the beginning, we had 4 enclaves between these two countries, which were until 1994, until the ceasefire, they were totally evacuated. So Armenians living in Azerbaijan, in those enclaves, they came to Armenia, and those in Armenia, they went back to Azerbaijan. I'm talking about the enclaves, which are controlled by the opposing countries. So this is Artsakh. The white line that you see is the admin border between these two countries from the Soviet maps. And you can see an island called Artsakh, which was within Azerbaijan. This was an area where Armenians used to live. It was owned by Armenians. It was managed by the Soviet Armenia, but it was cut off from Armenia. And during the first year of the war, I think it was in 1992, we had to leave this area because it was very dangerous. It was surrounded by Azerbaijanis. So this is the only enclave we have in Azerbaijan. While Azerbaijan has a couple of enclaves, these are 2 villages called Sofulu and Barkhudarli. They are near the border. As you can see, this is the admin border between these two countries, and this is the island that we have. This was also in 1992. It was evacuated. It was cleansed. Another area is Verin Voskebar. These 2 are in Tavush, while the last one is called Dikranashan. This is close to Nakhichevani border. This was an Azerbaijani village managed by Nakhichevan Autonomous Enclave during the Soviet era, and it was emptied or evacuated in 1992, and it went to the Armenian control. Now, the rumors say that when the 1994 ceasefire was signed, there was an oral agreement between the two parties saying that we are forgetting about the enclaves. So what Armenia has is keeping for Armenia. What Azerbaijan has, it's kept for Azerbaijan. But this is an oral agreement. There is no paper on that. And this is something that we have heard over the years, but there is no basis. And now Azerbaijan, if we are using the admin borders as a basis for the demarcation, Azerbaijan has the right saying that we need these areas back. And this is very dangerous, unfortunately.
Are the people who made the agreement alive still?
Well, one of them was Samvel Babayan, the other was Aliyev, and the other was Serge Sarkisian. So,
so is there a way to confirm those agreements?
Oral agreement between countries is nonsense, actually. I mean, it's Azerbaijanis can say no, we haven't said anything like this. So the enclaves are an open subject. There is nothing about them right now, but if we are using the Soviet maps, the admin maps as a basis, they have the right to claim them, and we have the right to claim Artsakh. But we all know that no Armenian will go and live in Artsakh, unfortunately. It's a dangerous area. I mean, nobody will live between Azeris. So let me show you a couple of maps all over the border. I mean, this is the border that I know very well. I've been working on this border for many years. So all the villages or the areas I will show you, I've been there personally. So I need to show you the line of contact and versus the admin maps. For example, this is an area called Voskebar. And I'm sure if you have heard the news in the past 10 years, you can see the yellow line, which is the admin border. You can see our troops, the red posts, and you can see their soldiers, their posts, the black troops. So as you can see, our troops have advanced in their area, in their admin area, for the reason that this is the road going from Yerevan's Ijevan to Tbilisi, going to Novemberian to Tbilisi. So our troops have advanced back then in 1994. So they protect this road, which is a very important road for us. This is the second road and it is the main road actually for now going to Azerbaijan, to Georgia actually. So all our transport goes from here. This was a road. I mean, they were very close to this road. They did a lot of shooting there. We had an incident 2 or 3 years ago when they shot a Russian driver, a big truck. It was stopped there for a couple of hours, and the army had to intervene so that they can remove the driver and the truck. This is another village called Aikebar, and as you can see that our troops are very close to the admin border, except one Azerbaijani post which has advanced. And the reason that they have advanced, they have taken over this hill to protect their village, or Ali Bailey in the back. So that's why they went up to the hill to have a more secure point, protecting their village. And while we are, I mean, these posts are very, very close to each other. It's like 100, 150 meters from each other. So as you can see, I mean, the line of contact was different than the admin border. The line of contact was a security zone for us so that we can protect our villages. And a lot of times we advanced on this line of contact. The last one was, as I said, in July 2020, but there was a bigger advance in 2018, beginning of 2019 or mid 2019, in Noyemberian. We advanced around 1.5 kilometers to secure our pipeline. And as you remember, back then it was a big mess and big PR show for some people. So let me now move to Syunik, and so that we understand what's going on. And when the army was ordered to leave the post with the volunteers, we understood clearly that the basis of the demarcation is the admin borders of the Soviet Union. So I'll show you a couple of very problematic areas. So this is again a map from 1978, 1 to 50,000 maps. This is Azerbaijan. It's a military map actually with its admin borders. As you can see, it's a topographic map. You have all these elevations going on. So this black line, the dotted line, is the admin border between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And as you can see, there is a village called Ayvazlu here, Ayvazlu, which is an Azerbaijani village, which we had occupied. And this is the main road going from Goris to Rapan. As you can see, this road is coming into the border and then going back. Now, this area was bordering with Kashatagh, so it was very, very far from the line of contact. During the war, our volunteers were on these mountains because these are the mountains that they can protect these villagers. Now what happened is that based on these Soviet maps, we are asked to go back. And I'm not sure till today if this road is controlled by Armenia or Azerbaijan. I'm not sure because I know that they are close to this village, the Azerbaijanis. So if they are close to this village, so they are basically very close to this road. And even Pashinyan said that it's true that this demarcation will create problems to our roads, but everything has a solution. This was his point, his announcement, I think yesterday or maybe 2 days ago, but I think it was yesterday morning. So if this is true, then this road is either very dangerous because they are very close, or it's blocked. To ease the situation, they had a deal with the Russians, and we will have on this border between Syunik and Azerbaijan, we will also have Russian peacekeepers. So they were also deployed, but I'm not sure if they are deployed everywhere. Behind the border, we have the Vorodan village. So imagine Azerbaijanis can sit on any hill on this. They can have a Vorodan village under their line of fire. And this road will be, I mean, they have the right to block this road if they want. But I'm not sure what the situation is right now. And I think in the coming days, it will, it will come out. This is the same on the Google Earth maps. So as you can see, there is the Ayvazli village here, the Vorodan village here. This green is the admin border. And this is M2 road, which is our biggest road going from Goris to Rapan. This is actually the transport road between Armenia and Iran. This is a very vital road for us. And this is the road that we have to protect with all our strength. And today we have what we have. Another part of this border in Syunik is Shurnukh. I'm sure you have heard about the Shurnukh mayor calling for self-defense. So as you can see, the admin border, this black line, is goes within this village. So we have two neighborhoods here. They are on the Azerbaijani side, and we have this part. This part of the village is on the Armenian side. So this black border, which goes up, as you can see it, it goes on the road. So sometimes it's behind the road. So this road, part of it will go back to Azerbaijan along a part of this village. Now, for now, the Azerbaijanis will not go into this village, but if they are sitting on these heights, and I think they are now on this height, this means that they are a couple of 100 meters away from the village, which means that they can, I mean, if something happens, they can easily scare people and drive them out of their village.
So actually, I have a question. What was the logic when the Soviets were drawing these borders? What was the logic for drawing the border on one side and then switching to the other side?
There is no logic behind it. It was all economical. Nobody thought about security. It was all economical. Many times
I agree, George, that mostly it was economic, but don't forget, I mean, one of the things that the whole Soviet economy was also based on the fact that you need to keep all the parties dependent on each other.
Exactly.
So by doing so, in the event you go away, this is what's going to happen. One of the key examples here, actually, the Fergana Valley, which is in Central Asia. It's on the conjunction of three republics. Three Soviet Central Asian republics, and to go from one village to other, you have to go through three republics now. And if the relationship between these three countries is not good, then you're screwed. This is the Soviet Moscow's sort of strategy to divide and conquer, kind of.
Yeah, Azerbaijan. But keep in mind that the Azerbaijanis, they always played it very smart. The 1929 demarcation, which happened between the two Soviet republics, it was around 31,000 square kilometers.
Right.
And what we have right now is 29,000 square kilometers.
Right.
I would guess that they tried always to take lands as much as possible for the future, for one day if they have an independent republic, which happened. Right. And many places like Shurnukh here, the way it had happened, they bought the land. They paid off Moscow to buy the land for them. And this has happened in a lot of places. I heard from old people saying that, how would it happen? And they say, you know what, they will talk to Moscow, they will pay some money there, and then we will know that this part has come to other side. But since it was a big, as you said, a big happy and sometimes unhappy family, nobody cared about these borders. It was like, okay, we're here, the Azerbaijanis are there, so everybody is happy. And the disaster part, this is actually Shurnukh, as you can see it on the Google Maps. And you can see the road is cut off. I mean, it's like, I don't know what to call this. So this is part of the road, which is in Azerbaijan. And then you have the part of road, which is in Azerbaijan, and also this. So if they are mobilized or deployed on this new border, which means this means that we are not using this road anymore. I don't have proper information right now because still the mobilization is not over. But if this is the basis, they have the right to come and stay here and say, this is our land, if we have accepted this. And the final one, which is the most disastrous actually, this is Rapan, the city of Rapan. And the blue area that you see is the river between Rapan, and on top of it, we have Rapan Airport, which was sarcastically recently decommissioned by the aviation, the civil aviation. I mean, a couple of months ago, it was commissioned, and they wanted to use it. Now, you can see the admin border coming up here and then going right and going close to this the city. And we have an area here called Spidagashen, which is a small neighborhood, which has a couple of houses there. Spidagashen is actually within Azerbaijan. And this is what started the whole process and the protest actually when the Rapani people, the Rapan mayor said, we are handing over these lands. And the house you saw, which was burning, basically it was a house located in Spidagashen because they knew that the house is going to the Azerbaijanis. So they burned it. Now to see it more clearly, because mainly it's in Russian and it's a very old map, this is how it looks like. So you have, this is Rapan city and this is its neighborhood. This is the actual airport that we have. And this is the border here. So Azerbaijanis now, they can sit 100 meters or even 50 meters away from, they can have a military post here. and they can just sit next to the airport, and we will never be able to use this airport anymore. And also, if they sit anywhere here, they will be like 1 kilometer away from Rapan city. So Rapan becoming a border city, imagine. And this is the neighborhood. I said it was Spidagashen, where we had a couple of houses, and one of these houses was burned actually. And this is the video we saw all over the internet 2 days ago. Now, if we go back and the way everything happened and the way everything was announced, and we know today that the admin maps of the Soviet Union are being used as the international boundaries. And unfortunately, this was confirmed by Mr. Pashinyan himself and the head of the Security Council, Mr. Grigoryan. He said that we needed the basis, and we used that basis. But we have a lot of old bases, and we could have used the old bases. I mean, we should not hurry things up just to demark a border or to delineate a border. We could have easily used the 1929, which has more, it's more substantial than what we have right now. So
didn't Dikranashan say that we want to use the 1929 maps? And if we did, are you aware of how that would affect this area?
Well, I mean, the 1929 maps, the suggestion came from the armed forces, because there was a discussion within the armed forces. They brought a lot of several scientists and researchers from Yerevan University and from the state cadastre to discuss all these. It was never researched before, and they came up with they said the best is to use the 1929 maps because we had a mutual agreement between Soviet Armenia and Soviet Azerbaijan. But these maps are very old. They don't have proper coordinate system on it. So I mean, it will take a couple of years to move these maps to a proper GIS standard or to a proper coordinate system, which can be used then implemented on ground. But
George, sorry to interrupt, but one thing I think from a historical perspective, I haven't seen the map and I'm not sure about the details, but don't forget that between 1920 and 1922 and 1936, there were no independent Armenia-Azerbaijan, Soviet even. There used to be the Transcaucasian Federative Socialist Republic.
Okay.
So yeah. I'm not sure if the 1929 maps, how would it be like? It's an administrative within an administrative division. Okay. So if you're going to be looking into it, I think it would be keeping that to keep that in mind in terms of the context of the map. Again, I'm not sure how it would be different, but there was no Soviet Socialist Armenia or Soviet Socialist Azerbaijan.
Azerbaijan, it's great always to have a historian with us because you can.
Just an informed history buff, not a historian.
Well, I mean, the issue is that 1929 maps are not discussed anymore because this is what they are using right now. Now, in the future, if there will be a delimitation or a demarcation, we might be able to renegotiate all these borders. But there is a big but here that there will be. This will take a year or 2 years. They will be deployed in all these strategic heights of Syunik. Now they have all these strategic heights, which are overlooking around 13 villages. And in these 2 years, anything can happen. Anything can happen. They can shoot on our villages. There can be cross-border clashes. Anything can happen. The ceasefire, which was signed on the 9th or 10th of November, it's fragile. It's very fragile, and anything can happen in the coming 2 years.
And also, let's not forget that usually in cases like this, again, it all depends on how the relationships are going to go or not. It's possible that when it comes to international border demarcations and delineation, there are a lot of territorial swaps. So, countries would say, okay, so you can take this one. Again, I'm not saying that this would be the case between Armenia and Azerbaijan, but there is also a possibility, depending how good of a negotiating position the Armenian side would be on.
Let me add 2 things before I finish my part. One, the problem if we are using these admin maps is that next week when Syunik is over, Azerbaijan has the right to say, you know what, I have the same demands in Nakhicheva and Tavush. So you need to return those bands. One. Second, they can also call back, they can ask back for the enclaves. That's very important. And they can say, you know what, we have people from Sofulu, who are refugees in the tent outside Baku, and they need to go back to Sofulu, which is in the heart of Tavush. This is also possible.
Right.
And at the end, none of the sides is talking about a peace agreement. The conversation or the situation in Armenia is that there will be a next war. And even the Azerbaijanis, they are talking about another war. They are not talking about a final peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan.
So, George, what is the urgency of delimiting these borders now?
Asbed, this is a question that I have no answer for at this point.
If I may, George, not that I'm responding on your behalf, I think it's important to know where your position is so that when there is an actual peace, when there is an actual border demarcation, you know where to stand. I think talking about these issues is important so that you can prepare yourself by looking at, what is the situation on the ground, surveying, that's something that George has done, surveying on the ground and so on, to be able to be prepared for that. So I think it's always good. I'm surprised that, again, I think to some large extent it is about our sort of sense of infallibility that we haven't done so in the last 20 years, 25 years when we had all the comfort to do so. But unfortunately, I think this is to preempt any kind of activity down the line.
Well, I mean, the process has been ongoing. It's done in Vardenis, in Gegharkunik, it's done in Vayotsor, and the last part was Sunik. The problem with Sunik that on the border we had 13 villages. In Varteni, in Gegharkunik, and in Vayotsor, we don't have villages on the border. Jermuk is on the border, is close to the border, so I'm sure you saw the news. Azerbaijan is building a big military barrack facing Jermuk. But there was no big fuss because it was all, mountains and hills and stuff. So nobody was caring to sit on this mountain or on that mountain in Gegharkunik and in Vayotsor. But when you came to Sunik, this is very sensitive for us, especially Sunik has a history with that. And especially that, in September, let's say 20th of September, if you asked me, I would have never talked about Spidagashen, why it's here. This yellow line, meant nothing for us. It was never shown anywhere. It was never discussed even. Nobody researched about it because this was not an option for us.
Yeah, it was not,
It was a non-issue.
It was not meaningful.
You can see Spidagashen here, for example. This is Rapan. People have come here and built houses. This is Ghazanchi village, which is an empty village right now. It's all ruined houses. These lands are used by these people here to, for their family, for their sheep and for orchards and stuff like that. So it was never a topic to discuss.
I think, from my understanding, it depends on essentially what this border demarcation process is used for, right? If it's used for creating the basis for igniting the future conflict, then it's bad. But if it's used for ensuring that there is more security in the future, whether on the Armenian or Azerbaijani side, then it's good. But at least from my perspective, the signs that I'm seeing are that the Azerbaijani side is using its maximalist position and even encroaching on the border in some cases and saying, well, this is ours and you should draw back. And that threatens Armenia's security and further introduces cracks in the ceasefire.
Hovigjan, personally, when it comes to Azerbaijan, I'm the advocate's devil. I go with the worst scenario. I'll tell you a scenario right now. They can move refugees to Spidagashen, and after a couple of months, you'll hear about stories on the border, trafficking and kidnapping and stuff like that, shooting and stuff like that. And they will say, this is a family creating a problem. So when you have these hills that you can control this area, and then you bring your people to live here, which are under fire actually, this is something you're bringing to do provocation, which they can do very well. So especially that nobody in Azerbaijan is talking about the final peace agreement with Armenia. Nobody. Even the ceasefire agreement doesn't mention any final peace agreement. It talks about opening the roads, the international roads, but not about the final peace agreement. I believe that once this deployment is over by both armies, which might be by end of December, I believe in January we'll start discussions on a new peace agreement between Azerbaijan and Armenia. I think this will be the next step. I mean, next logical step if nothing else happens.
Okay, well, this was this was longer than we imagined, but it was very informative. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thank you, Hovik. Thank you, Asbed.
Yes, this was very interesting. Thank you, George, and thank you, Asbed.